said no, you know, she wasn't, but she clarified that indeed she was a preschool teacher. And then I said, you wouldn't happen to be Montessori certified? She said, well, I am. I go, oh. And she'll probably never speak to me again. But anyway, she went over to see Father Ray, and the rest is history. She was the first director for our daycare center that is for poor children who cannot afford to go anywhere else. And so he was doing that kind of thing. And so 20 years later, 1984, I joined the parish, but I would only run into him from time to time. He was unique, that was for sure. But he was getting the same message across as Tilden was. So what did Evelyn Underhill teach me? I can't believe to tell you what it was, but I mean, I would panic if I didn't have a book of hers nearby. But in terms of the metaphor that we've been using these several days about building theology's house, I decided to take some things from one of her books called The House of the Soul. And one of the things about Evelyn Underhill is that she's very homey. I mean, she's a great mystical writer, but she has a kind of homey way of presenting it. And because I really like cemeteries, I managed to get to England and visit her grave. And I was very upset that it didn't have her real name on. It was only her husband's name, by the way, for the feminists. Very upsetting. But in The House of the Soul, she takes an approach, of course, from earlier mystical writers, like Teresa of Avila, for example. And, of course, and I borrowed that for this metaphor. She uses ordinary and everydayness of life as the stuff of the reflection and analysis. So she takes something very much present in everyone's everyday life and then sort of mines that. You know, not unlike that Tennyson poem. You just take something very small and go as deep into it as you can. And then there is the mystery, the discovery. The first point she makes in the book is that the soul's house is not too big an idea. She has a lot of different ways of saying that. Is, you know, you don't have to sort of go overboard. Start small. But it comes with many other ideas. And it comes with the truths of the interior life. First, she talks about the position of the house. It is not alone, and this is so key. It's not one of these big standalone houses. Because, as she says, these singular mansions have no place in Christian spirituality. Because Christian spirituality knows nothing of severe individualism. So our house, the house that she's talking about, is a vast spirit, it's part of a vast spiritual organism. And even the most hidden life, she would say, you know, the hermit or the cloistered nun, is never lived for itself alone. There's always the connection. Our soul's house forms part of the vast city of God. To me, that's the key. That we are part of that. Our souls are part of the vast city of God. Now here's the part, I think, at the end of a retreat like this. A retreat is always a sacred time. I mean, in the Catholic tradition, it's time and space set apart, where once you open yourself, something will happen, as sure as the sun comes up in the morning. That's the way it is. She says the soul's house is two-storied, and the ground floor is our natural life, our biological conditioning, the kind of genetic structure we bring, as you didn't use that, our animal instincts, our affinities, And it is very, very important, she said, that you pay attention to that. Because, for many reasons, first of all, the builder and the maker is God. So she is very into the bodiliness of it all. But there is also an upper floor, she says. The upper floor has the capacity for God with supernatural possibilities. Now, the point she makes over and over again is that we are called to live on both floors. The soul's house will never be a real home. You know, I mean, that's such an evocative word, isn't it? Will never be a real home unless the ground floor is as cared for as the beautiful rooms upstairs. In other words, don't over-spiritualize everything. The whole house, however, must be a house of prayer. And she quotes Augustine, and this is one of Augustine. Augustine has so many wonderful quotes, but this is really good one. The house of, this is Augustine speaking now, the house of my soul is narrow. Do thou, O God, enter and enlarge it. It is ruinous. Do thou repair it. So that, you know, it reminds me, somebody was talking about, you know, suppose you grow up in a house that's, you know, filled with a lot of bad stuff, right? How do you deal with that? Well, the Augustine answer is repair it. I think I told you, lock the door and go somewhere else. But ponder the Augustine part, you know. So, on the ground floor, this can be fun. She says the ground floor must have a well-ordered life, you know, to do that. We are required to live in the whole of the house, but prudence is really important on the ground floor. And she likens prudence to a housekeeper. Don't we all wish we had one? She says it will, the prudence, if you think of prudence as a housekeeper, prudence will balance prayer and action, never giving out beyond her powers, that's important, or forgetting to get fresh supplies. Her spiritual larder is never low. So prudence is not overdoing everything, not overdoing anything. She talks about furnishings. Let's furnish this house of the soul. And she says you furnish it with temperance, moderation, and fortitude. Those are virtues. She wrote another piece, of course, about the gifts of the Holy Spirit, in which this is an echo of that. For Aquinas, temperance is the virtue of the beautiful. Okay. So she's always hearkening back to Aquinas and Augustine. But Underhill says if the house is to be a success, is the word she uses, and now this really speaks to me, what we leave out will be as important as what we leave in. All right? Unclutter the inner life. Unclutter the outer life and the inner life. And beware, be careful, she says, of the restless, energetic desire to get things done. Does that seem familiar? Right. That's right. I think particularly people who are in active ministry, you know, just get it done. Sometimes it's best to leave things alone. Leave it alone. The impetuous determination to remodel the world nearer to our heart's desires is a problem too. Believe me, I know about that. Aquinas says that disquiet diminishes sanctity, and sanctity needs to increase. Pope Francis may have read Underhill, because he has some of these themes popping up. She says the house of the soul must be an open house for all who are sent to it, all for whom there are things to be done. So there's an openness, but then we have to get our housekeeper prudence in there to make sure things are not overdone. Okay. Now, upstairs and downstairs, in work and in prayer, it must wholly serve a creative purpose. There's that word again, creative. Bringing all the needs of the city and of the vast, desolate world beyond the city, within the area of its wide-spreading love. It reminds me of John of the Cross, who says, in the evening of life, only love matters. But one of the things I wanted to point out is I have a kind of 5C model that I use when thinking about ministry and the spiritual undergirdings of it. It's a paradigm I've worked with over the years. And the 5 C's are this. First is collaboration. And the collaboration is not as easy as it might sound. I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, most people like to have things done their way, right? And so you have to give up some of that when you're in collaboration. The second is courage. And the third is creativity, and I think they are really linked together. The fourth is compassion, and the fifth is commitment. And I think those are the characteristics of ministry in our time, in the House of the Soul. Back to Underhill. I think I've probably said everything I have to say about the House of the Soul. But I have an icon of her, which I will leave here for you to see. She was in her 60s when she died. She's on the Anglican list of saints. June 22nd, I think, is her day. June 22nd in our day are the martyrs, Thomas More and John Fisher. But anyway, there she is. She never became a Catholic. She came very close to it. She didn't become Catholic because of the way, because she thought it was so anti-intellectual at that time. Even because there was a lot of, I mean, scholars were being watched all the time. And so she did not. That's a lovely sound. We keep hearing that sound.
Oh, you've noticed.
I have. I thought maybe it was the angelic bells. Or something. So her spiritual director was Baron von Hugel, who himself was spiritual director, probably most of the abbots of Europe, Catholic layman, and it was he who led her to take her incredibly developed spiritual intuition and apply it in a more practical way to something like a soup kitchen. So under his influence, she began to spend one day a week with a kind of with a group of people she never would have been with at all, and they had a very close and mutually enriching relationship, I think. And she would have become a Catholic, but then a lot of people she knew were landed on the list, the list of people who weren't allowed to write and so forth. So she felt she just couldn't take that step to do that. But any questions about her? I mean, the point about all of this is that the more active you are, the more you need a kind of spiritual practice that's going to ground you and remember the housekeeper